Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to episode 52 of the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and my guest today is artistic director, writer, and director Sheldon Epps. Mr. Epps' work has been performed on stages from Broadway to the West End, across the US, in Japan, Australia, South America, and Africa. Mr. Epps served for 4 years as the Associate Artistic Director at the Old Globe Theatre in San Diego, and for 20 years as Artistic Director at the Pasadena Playhouse in Los Angeles. His extensive career in theatre and television literally fills a book. His recently released memoir, My Own Directions, A Black Man's Journey in the American Theatre, was recently released. Today we'll be talking about just two of Mr. Epps' works, Blues in the Night, filmed at the Donmar Warehouse and broadcast on Thames Television in 1987, and Play On, filmed at the Pasadena Playhouse in 2000 and broadcast on PBS's Great Performances. Welcome, Mr. Epps.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Nice to talk to you.
I'm very excited. So you talk in your book about your childhood desire to be a lawyer and that it took you until high school to unearth your theatrical ambitions. What made you fall in love with theater?
Well, it was moving from Los Angeles to Teaneck, New Jersey, where I was close to Broadway, and my mother loved going to the theater, so she started taking me when I was about 11 or 12 to see Broadway shows, and I saw the Broadway production of Hello, Dolly and Sammy Davis Jr. and Golden Boy and Hallelujah Baby and many, many others. And that was really like discovering a magical kingdom, because I hadn't seen anything like that in Los Angeles. And then I started being in plays and musicals in junior high school and high school, and happily played Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady in my senior year of high school, which is about as good a role as you can get as a young actor. So I think it was around that time that I said, oh, I'm pretty good at this. Maybe I'll really try to make a go of this as a living.
I was very envious when I was reading that at the time that you were seeing Hello, Dolly, that it was possible to travel to New York, have lunch, and see a show for $20.
or less even, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I seem to have lodged in my head that you could get a balcony ticket or second balcony ticket maybe for like $4.75, which is amazing. That's less than the tax on a current Broadway ticket.
Yeah, and $20 won't even get you a bus ticket from Jersey to New York anymore.
Right.
You also talked in the book about, later you talked about when Jack Venza called you and to film Play On, that you were very excited because you'd also grown up watching performances on PBS.
Yeah.
What shows were you watching? Do you remember specific shows?
Well, I know I watched great performances live from Lincoln Center. I believe that there was a PBS show called American Playhouse, which was actually straight plays from regional theaters, which was pretty unusual, at that time. But that was a great series. So I certainly knew his name and his credit very well because it would pop up at the end of all of those great shows. So it was very funny when he said, my name is Jacques Venza. Have you ever heard of me? Do you know who I am? I said, of course I do. My goodness. And as you said, this was the end of the run of Play On at Pasadena Playhouse. And there was only 1 week left in the run. And he said, well, I have this crazy idea. I saw your show on Saturday night. This was a Monday morning. And he said, this is probably insane, but do you think we could get it filmed by the end of the week before the show closes? And I said, well, that is insane, but, Lord knows I'm willing to try if you are.
How on earth there's so many contract negotiations that have to happen to film a live theater show. How did that happen in less than a week?
I don't know. I don't know if it was the power of Jacques Venza or the power of PBS. The line producer, who is still a line producer, major producer at PBS, David Horn, was in charge of a lot of the contract negotiations. And we just sort of pushed it through, and everybody agreed. Everybody was thrilled, of course, to want to do it. But there was a lot involved because, you have the actors' contracts, the musicians, the theaters, the designers, everybody.
That's a lot of phone calls to make.
A lot of phone calls. We just pushed it through. And the only adjustment we made was to also add one day of filming after we closed on Sunday, one day of filming without an audience so we could move in for close ups and side shots and all of that we couldn't get during a performance.
I want to come back to Play On, but just quickly going back to you watching PBS as you were growing up and as you were studying theater, what influence do you think having access to theater on television had on you?
Well, it's just great exposure, particularly a lot of things around Broadway, as I said, I could see, but I even at that point, I couldn't afford to go to the opera. So I'd watch opera, I'd watch other concerts from Lincoln Center. And that series, American Playhouse, was so great because basically you could travel all over the country and see shows from the Guthrie and from ACT in San Francisco. I remember specifically a great production of Cyrano de Bergerac that was directed from Bill Ball from ACT. So that was hugely valuable just to have exposure to the work of all of those theaters all over the country because God knows then or now I couldn't travel like
Mhm.
that to hit all of those theaters. And
Mm.
so it exposed me to a huge variety of theatrical styles, things, frankly, that I probably would not have read, but was very happy to watch them, Chekhov and Ibsen and all of that. I probably would not have read those things at that age, but I certainly loved watching them. So, I miss the fact that there is so much on public television, particularly in the area of theater. There's still some, but not nearly as much as there was during that time.
Yeah, there was talk a little while ago of a national theater network that would
Yeah.
be broadcasting work from regional theaters on one single platform. I'm not sure where that's at. I would love that to happen.
Yeah. It would seem so doable now with streaming and all the additional platforms that there are. I wish somebody would figure that out because that would be great.
There are great people behind the scenes, hopefully making that happen.
Let's
But
hope
let's
so.
rewind back to the late '80s, when you were working on Blues in the Night, which started as a late night show with the production company.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that a show that has now had such a long, long history and had hundreds of productions, as you said, all over the world, really started as a late night cabaret show, only intended to be done for about 7 performances. And the idea was that it was a very small theater without any wing space. So what we were trying to do was to do cabaret shows, but instead of trying to hide what was on the set, make use of it and really give it an environment and not just put 4 people on stools singing songs, but really try to make it more dramatic and theatrical. So, yeah, I conceived this show along with the very talented David Brunetti, who was the original musical director. That was all blues and jazz music from roughly from the late 20s to the early 40s, set in a cheap hotel in 3 different hotel rooms, and then the band downstairs in the basement of the hotel.
So, and I love the fact that you were like I want to say double using, but using the set of what was playing in the early evening, and then
Yes.
using the same set in the for the late night shows.
Right, right. Yeah, it was a way to sort of just get double mileage out of whatever set was there and frankly more performances in the week. Instead of doing 5 or 6 performances just of the play, we did those 5 or 6 performances plus 4 performances of the late night cabaret. And
Mm,
several of the things from that series became quite popular. That was where Marry Me a Little was originally done as well,
mm.
that
The
then also
Sondheim Review.
moved. Yeah, the Sondheim Review, which people are still doing now. And Blues in the Night then did, after several years, moved to Broadway and then to the West End in London, where it was filmed in London, and has been produced many, many, many times, gratefully.
And you were able to direct it when it transferred to the Donmar warehouse?
I was good fortune and pushiness on someone's behalf made it possible for me to go over to direct it at the Donmar, and it was originally scheduled, I think, for a 4 or 5 week run. Maria Friedman, who has become quite popular, big star in musical theater over there and here, and now a great director, was in the original cast, the original London cast. And we took off right away. And Donmar is a great theater, but not a lot of seating. I think it's around 200, 220, something like that. So we sold out very quickly. And our good fortune is that something that was coming in later in the summer dropped out. So we were invited back to another run at the Donmar. And during that run, conversations started about moving it to a West End theater, and we moved to the Piccadilly Theater.
And at the Dunmar, Nika Burns was also involved in the
Yes,
production. Was very You write in the book that she was very supportive of the show too.
yes, she was. She was. I think her title was managing director or general manager, and sort of odd to think that she's now the head of uh, Theater Empire, NIMAX Theaters, which is one of the biggest theater chains in London. And
Mm,
I think she was also the president of the Society of West End Theaters for a while. May still be, actually.
mm.
But yeah, she was just at the beginning of her career too, and she was the manager of the theater and very supportive, and the one who, when the other show dropped out later in the season, got on the phone right away and said, "Can you come back and remount it for another 4 week run?" Um, and we probably would not have had to move to the Piccadilly if we had not gone back for the second run. So very grateful to her for that.
And when did the filming with Thames Television come about?
That was actually a little bit later. It was after the run at the Piccadilly, but before we did a tour. We were scheduled to do a national tour in all over England. And it was Thames Television, I believe. And again, one of those unexpected calls said, "Can we get this done?" And I believe, if I'm right about this, you you or someone could check me on this, but I believe we had actually closed by that time at the Piccadilly, but we put everybody back together, the cast that had been at the Piccadilly, to film it for Thames Television.
And do you remember, was it, my sources are, they differ in where it was filmed. Was it filmed at the Dunmar or in a studio?
It was filmed in the studio. It
Hmm.
was filmed in the studio, but we sort of recreated a theater environment. Actually, a little different than what we'd had at the Dunmar or at the Piccadilly. We did a kind of cabaret environment, uh,
Mm,
people sitting at tables, um, as well as people in a grandstand behind the tables. But it
mm,
was in the studio environment, much smaller than the space we'd had in the theater. So we had to adjust all the movement and choreography and everything. Uh,
mm.
and it was a very British style. It had a British television director, and it had a kind of style that would have been different if we'd been in the theater or if we'd shot it in America. But it was very good and very well received.
Mm. And was that broadcast before the tour?
Yes, it was, which
Oh,
it
very
became sort
interesting.
of a great commercial for the tour, actually, and
Yeah.
really got the word out there about the show again, and really motivated people to come and see the tour.
And kind of unusual for that time because usually, even now, most kind of shows like that are filmed either at the end of their run and then, nothing else is happening with the show, so it's okay to
Right.
release it. So I think that's wonderful that it was used as a
Yeah.
way to make people aware of it.
Right. Right. No, it was unusual to number one, get the offer, and we were just so lucky that the original cast, the London cast, was still available, and it was quick. I
Mm.
think we did like 4 days of rehearsal and then shot it, so it was fast. Fortunately, it wasn't too long after we closed, and people remembered everything. So that was great.
Yeah, muscle memory kicks in.
Yes, exactly.
Do you have a sense? I know it was like filmed for television, so it's not quite filming live theater, but the differences between filming in the UK versus the US?
Well, it's just a different camera style for one thing. The word I want to use, I don't know why this word pops to mind, but it's a cooler style, cooler in temperature. Um,
Hmm.
I think of things that have been shot usually in the theater and similar things like Ain't Misbehavin', which obviously was filmed after the Broadway run. Just
Mm.
the temperature is higher somehow.
Mm.
And I think as I'm remembering now, I haven't actually seen it in a long time, but as I'm remembering now, the style of shooting was much more long shots with less cutting
Mm.
either um, in the studio or later when they were editing. It was long sustained shots, whereas American television, and this has been true in the television work that I do, cuts a lot more frequently. It's rare to see. There was one number, "Wasted Life Blues," in Blues in the Night, that's about 3 or 4 minutes, and he did it all in one long 3 minute shot. You would never do that
Wow.
on American television.
You got to have cutaways and different angles and
Yes, exactly, exactly.
yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. I'm curious about this idea of like a cooler temperature.
Yeah. It's also in the lighting, as I remember, and just a sense that it was a little bit more subdued and less.
Mm.
Another way to say it would be less in your face, less present, a little cooler,
Hmm.
which I think is true of a lot of British television. You know,
Yeah, that British sentiment versus a kind of like brash American sentiment.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
very, very interesting. It makes me want to do like a side by side with different captures. Like I'm thinking of
Mm.
Company that was filmed at the Donmar in '96 versus Company
Uh-huh.
filmed at Lincoln Center.
Right,
It's very different feels, and obviously
right.
they're very different productions, but also how they're captured is very different.
Yeah. No, that's true. That'd be interesting to watch one after the other and sort of note the differences.
Mm. What was the response to the TV broadcast?
Well, it was a long time ago, but as I remember, it was very positive. It got a lot of viewership because a lot of people had seen it in the theater. Well reviewed, and as I said, because it was the original London company, the performances were great and really, really well received. And I think it was played, it was broadcast, over several years because they keep
Mm.
things in the sort of library there. So they would bring it back frequently. Finally, I think it just looked too old fashioned, with changes in technical stuff for them to air it anymore. But they did air it for a long, long time.
And you actually can find it on YouTube now. I can send you a link
Oh,
so you can
really?
see it. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yes, please do because I haven't seen it in a long time.
So let's fast forward to 2000 to play on at the Pasadena Playhouse. So as we were talking about earlier, Jacques Venza reached out to you. And then you mentioned that you filmed the last two performances and then a extra performance or extra filming day
Uh
on the
huh.
Monday after to get pickups and such. Um, and we've talked a little bit about the contracts. How did the funding work to pay everybody for those contracts?
It all came through PBS. The
Mm.
theaters weren't involved. The theater actually had to be contracted and paid as the original producer, but it all came through PBS. It was all paid for by
Mm.
uh, PBS.
Wow, that's so extraordinary.
And all of our contracts were with PBS, as a
Right.
matter of fact. Yeah.
Was there any resistance either within the company or in the creative team to having it filmed?
Oh, no, no, everybody was thrilled. Um, Number one, everybody made a little bit more money, which was great, because this was a regional theater, so everybody had been paid regional theater salaries. So to get a little bump in pay was nice for everybody. But we all realized
Yeah.
what great exposure it was, and everybody loves great performances and longs to be a part of that. So no, everybody was on board immediately, and it was great for the theater also because it was national exposure for Pasadena Playhouse, and the theater
Mm.
looks great in the filming, I must say. Gary
It really
Halverson
does.
actually did the camera direction for it, and he did a beautiful job on it. It's really well shot.
Mm. It's a gorgeous capture, and the production is just so much fun. It's so colorful. The performances are amazing.
Thank
It
you.
Yeah, it's just glorious. I wish that it was still, again, it's on YouTube, but I wish it was like formally available so that people could purchase it or stream it, formally, so that the right residuals go to the right people.
Yeah, they actually during the pandemic, 2 years ago, when they were
Mm.
bringing back a lot of things, um, David Horn, the man I mentioned before, was in touch with me, and we really tried to sort of resuscitate it,
Mm.
and try to rebroadcast it because people really were so hungry for things to watch, and that was one apparently that people had asked for. But it just got too complicated with all the rights for the songs and the orchestrations and actors' contracts, and everybody was so dispersed by then that it was hard to pull it all together. But as you said, somehow it's on YouTube, so you can see it there.
It's YouTube is a treasure trove of captured theater and
Yes.
bootlegs aside, but like proper captures. And I just I my goal with my website is to make people aware of these shows and make them available
Oh,
again.
that's great. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because people often ask about it and say, is it possible to see any of it? So it's nice to be able to point them there.
Mm. And you've worked extensively in television as well. And you mentioned in the book how your work in television influenced growth at the Pasadena Playhouse. What do you think theater can learn from television?
What can theater learn from television? I usually think of it the other way around because I think the television can learn a lot from the theater in terms of storytelling and uh, acting and performances and all of that. And we're seeing certainly a lot more theater writers working in television now.
Mm.
But television is great for mass exposure of the product. Unfortunately, because runs are short and seating is, we don't have thousands and thousands of seats in the theater. When a show opens at a regional theater, it's only going to be exposed to maybe several hundred people a night for 4 or 5 weeks of performances, and then it's over.
Mm.
Going back to our conversation we had, if there was a way to more simply capture performances in the theater and have a record of all of that good work and expose it to audiences, not with the idea that they would only watch theater uh, on the screen, but that it would be a way of exposing audiences and wooing them to come into the theater. So
Mm.
much like what we were saying with Blues in the Night, that it would become sort of a massive commercial to woo people to come in and have the live theater experience, which
Mm.
has often happened. I think that's been true with several Broadway shows have sustained their runs on Broadway either by some kind of capture or a film or whatever.
Yeah. And then the tours as well have benefited from those captures.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I feel like you've kind of answered this question, but I still want to ask it. What would you say to the naysayers, to the people who are hesitant to put their work on screen?
I'd say do it. Especially right now, I'd say do it because, people are still leery about coming into the theater and having close contact with bodies that they don't know. So, especially now, take the opportunity to capture work and get it out there so that audiences can and will see it. And I do honestly believe that it is a way to entice audiences into the theater. They can enjoy it, in a capture, and I enjoy it in a capture. But I think if it's done right, you get a sense that the people who are in the theater are having a better time than you are watching it on screen. So I think it makes you want to go to the theater to see a show.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. What do you think the future of filming live theater looks like?
I hope it's good. It's complicated. As opposed to the two instances we've talked about, where it used to be kind of loosey goosey. It's now become a lot more complicated, contractually, a lot more expensive. Um, but it's been proven that there's an audience for it. There are people who are really willing to purchase it. Look how successful the National Theater Live broadcasts are. Um,
Mm.
so I think there'll be more and more of it. And I think there'll be more and more of it as we continue to come out of the pandemic and try to get people to come back to the live experience. In the meantime, I think we'll be using captures more and more. It's a play that's opening, the collaboration that's opening at Manhattan Theater Club next week, I think, has already done their film, and they're going to kind of support each other, is the plan.
Mm.
So we'll see how that works out.
Very interesting.
These are a few of my favorite things.
My final segment is called My Favorite Things, where I ask you my favorite questions. To start off
Okay.
with, what is your favorite musical?
My favorite musical, Dreamgirls,
Ooh,
which I finally, after years and years, had the chance to direct in Houston. But
yeah.
I love that musical, and when you actually direct it, you see how tremendously artful it is.
Do you have a favorite filmed live musical?
I think Sweeney Todd is very good. That capture was really well done.
The original Broadway?
Yeah, yeah, it was really, really well done. Also, Sunday in the Park with George was very well done. Those are both
Mm.
really, they both found that great balance between using the camera and keeping the theater experience.
Both gateway drugs for many people into Sondheim and into filmed theater and musicals on stage.
Yes, you're right. You're right. And Hamilton, of course, is a great, great capture. Much, much more sophisticated and expensive than many others. But Tommy Kail did a tremendous job on that.
Yeah, it is fabulous. A filmed live musical, it's not exactly a stage show and it's not exactly a film. So, what should we call it?
A filmed live musical. Um, well, I do like the term capture, because you are capturing the live experience. Um, it's not very descriptive, but it does, in a sense, encapsulate what's being done, which is especially when it's done in front of a live audience. So
Mm,
live audience capture.
I like it.
Okay.
What stage musicals do you wish had been filmed?
Oh, all of them. I mean, there's so many things you hear about that, it would have been great to see Ethel Merman in Gypsy, or, you know, I'd love to go back and see Sammy Davis Jr. in Golden Boy, because it was one of the greatest performances, as I remember, I'd ever seen. But I think almost all of them that we didn't get to see because they had short runs, or um, were never toured or whatever. And if you weren't in New York and you didn't have a chance to see it, it'd be great to go back and see all of them. Company, which I saw as a teenager, and used to sneak into the second act over and over again, which had just, one of the greatest original companies of any musical ever done, original cast. I mean, it'd be great to, there's the film of the recording of the album, but it would be great to have a capture of those performances on stage as well.
Oh, absolutely. And final question, what stage musicals would you like to see filmed in the future?
All of them. No, again, as I just said, I think it's a great tool for capturing history and not letting performances evaporate. So as often as it can happen, I'm all for it. I do think you have to continue to think of the ways to combine the two forms in a way that makes it exciting and different and interesting. But I think people are doing that more and more and more and more cleverly all the time. So I encourage everybody to get everything captured.
Yes, please, and thank you.
I'm sure you agree.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been truly delightful to talk with you. You can purchase a copy of my own directions wherever good books are available, and I will have a link for that in the show notes. Thank you again, Mr. Epps.
Thank you.
The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by our host, Luisa Lyons, with thanks to our wonderful patrons, Josh Brandon, Geraldine Brewer, Belinda Broido, Elliot Charles, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Luke Hasselman, David Jones, James T. Lane, Heather Madrone, Wendy Marcotte, Alison Matthews, Al Monaco, David Negrin, Amy Penn, Gerald Piper, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, Joe Tillotson, Beck Twist, and Tyson Van Helsing for financially supporting this site. FilmedLiveMusicals.com is the most comprehensive list of film stage musicals. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. If you would like early access to this very podcast, early access to site content, the full weekly newsletter with info on upcoming streams, and exclusive access to the streaming calendar, become a Filmed Live Musicals patron for as little as $3 a month. Visit FilmedLiveMusicals.com to learn more. If you like what you hear, please leave a review on Apple Music. It really helps get the word out about the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.